Good morning. My name is Eline van der Kruk. I'm assistant professor at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. At the moment, it's 3 o'clock in the Netherlands, so I'm hopefully fast asleep. If you have any questions about this presentation, please come to my session this afternoon, and I'm happy to answer them. So I'm presenting on behalf. I'm presenting the work of my master student Maud Hendriksen, and the research we're doing is on age-related compensation strategies. So if you think about aging, aging starts quite early on. So already about your mid-20s, your neural system starts to decline. And only later on, we also see changes in the muscular system and the skeletal system. Initially, we won't really notice any of this decline because we have quite a high reserve. So we can have a decline in capacity before we get problems or inabilities in executing a task. Even if we find an inability, we are quite good in compensating, meaning that we can change the movement to still execute the same task. To give you an example, we're looking at standing up from a chair. The task is to get out of a chair. You can do that when not using your arms, or you can start to compensate by pushing off on the armrest. So we're quite interested in these compensation strategies because we see that people use the same strategies, sort of like the optimal control theory, and we think that it tells us something about how we solve for redundancy. And we say compensation can happen for two reasons. So either there's a lack of capacity, so for instance, a lack of muscle strength, or we have altered movement objectives. So it could be that we want to maintain a certain stability, or we want to avoid pain, and therefore we alter our movements. In any case, these adaptation strategies tell us a lot about the neuromuscular function. So we did a big experiment in early 2020 in which we measured 50 participants and we let them do sit-to-walk strategies without giving them any instructions. One of the strategies that we saw a lot was sit-to-stand using a thigh push-off. And we haven't found much on this in the biomechanical literature, but if you think about it, you maybe use it quite often, and if you otherwise, you probably see other people using it quite often. So we're thinking, is there a biomechanical benefit of using these thigh push-up strategies over using an armrest or not using your arms at all? And we had three hypotheses. So we think that a thigh push-off might reduce the lower back loading. We think that it has a relative lower shoulder force or shoulder load compared to pushing up from the armrest. And we think that also based on the fact that we saw that people that had a higher fear of falling used the thigh push-off more often, it's easier to stabilize your upper body when you have your arms on your thighs, sort of closing the loop. And also it might give you some additional proprioceptive feedback if you have your hands on your thighs. So in this experiment, or in this preliminary data analysis, we analyzed the first two hypotheses. And we did that with the data set that we collected early 2020. And that experiment will soon be published in the Nature Partner Journal Aging, so it will be available. We have 50 participants, but we had 14 young women, we had young men, older women, and older men. First, we let them do these sit-to-walk strategies where we didn't give them any instructions. We captured the 3D kinematics with Vicon. We measured their muscle activation patterns with EMG, 16 EMG sensors. We had an instrumented chair where we could measure the forces on the seat and on the armrest, and we could measure the ground reaction forces using the Kistler force plate. We also measured the capacity. We did the strength analysis, nerve conduction, balance, joint range of motion, proprioceptive acuity, and the questionnaire. And in this questionnaire was where we also found the fear of falling. So on top of this, we ended this experiment with a sit-to-stand experiment where we did give them instructions on how to get out of a chair. We asked them to do three different strategies, namely standing up with the arms crossed over the chest, standing up, pushing off on the thighs, and standing up, pushing off on the armrest. And we asked them to repeat each of these strategies 3 times. We measured the push-up force between the hands and the thigh using a self-built mini force plate where we had a force sensor, one directional, between 2 metallic round plates that fitted in the palm of the hand. The data were sent to Raspberry Pi. From the Raspberry Pis, we had them on both hands, were synchronized and also synchronized with the other systems, and the system was calibrated every time based on the Kistler force plates. So for this preliminary results, so for this abstract, we analyzed the elderly men first. So we are working on analyzing everyone. We did a inverse dynamics and a static optimization using OpenSim. For this, we used an existing model from Ratigopal, later adjusted by Ley, which had 80 heel-type muscles in the lower extremities and is torque generated in the upper extremities. We adjusted the maximum isometric forces to older adults, and also we adjusted the pronation and supination range of motion of the forearm because we found that these were a bit unrealistic in the existing model. So we scaled the model, we applied inverse kinematics, inverse dynamics, did a static optimization, and then compared the muscle activation to EMG measurements. Okay, so now to the results of these preliminary analysis. So we only looked at the elderly men. We had a slight problem with 3 of them, where the 2 force plates between left and right on the palm of the hands were not synchronized. So we left them out for the thigh push-off analysis, but included them in the others. So for the preliminary results on these elderly men, we indeed saw that compared to no arms, the thigh push-off had a lower lumbar joint moment. We also saw that the armrest push-off, however, had even a lower lumbar joint moment compared to the thigh push-off. So we figured, well, why would you then still choose a thigh push-off if it's about unloading the back? So we're interested about the upper limb loading. And what we see between the armrest push-off compared to the thigh push-off is that the armrest push-off requires a higher shoulder external rotation, significantly, and a higher elbow extension moment. We also saw a slightly higher shoulder abduction moment in the armrest push-off compared to the thigh push-off, but only on the dominant side. And clinically, this doesn't seem very relevant or not significant, let's put it that way. So statistically significant, not clinically significant. So to move on to go back to the hypothesis that we have, we assumed, or we hypothesized, that it reduces the lower back loading. It has a relative lower shoulder loading, and indeed we saw that the thigh push-off unloads the lower limb compared to no arms. We saw that the thigh push-off results in lower elbow extension and shoulder internal rotation and abduction moment. And adults might use a thigh push-off as a strategy to unload the lower back without putting more loading on the upper limb. However, of course, we still have our third hypothesis ready, and our third hypothesis was about stability, which we're still basically how we're analyzing it now is using predictive simulations, where we're trying to estimate a stability margin using the different strategies. And we're still estimating a muscle force for all participants, where we're also including muscles in the shoulder. So I would like to thank Maud Hendriksen here on the left of the picture, and with her colleagues, master colleagues, who all 3 of them helped collect the data early 2020. If you have any questions, come find me this afternoon in the session Locomotion in Elderly, and I would like to thank you for your attention and enjoy the conference.